Hi everyone, today we are going to solve buildings with an ocean view, and this is LeetCode number 1762, and it's a medium difficulty problem. So for this question, we have n buildings in a line, and we are given a integer array that contains the height of each building. The ocean is to the right of all the buildings, and we want to return a list of indices of the buildings that have an ocean view in increasing order. So we first need to define what gives a building an ocean view. And it's stated in the problem that a building has an ocean view if all of its buildings to the right have a smaller height. So for the example provided, we can see that building 0, 2, and 3 all have an ocean view. And this is because each building is taller than all the buildings to its right. So if we start looking at index 0, we want to check if it is the tallest building compared to the rest of the buildings to its right. And since it is, we would mark it as a building with an ocean view. And then we would move on to building 1, and we would check building 1 if it is the tallest building compared to all the buildings to its right. And we can see that it's not, so that's why we don't mark 1 as a building with an ocean view. But if we kind of walk through this problem and code it out, we'll realize that it's actually a O of n squared solution. So how else can we approach this problem in a more efficient way? Well, since we want to compare the current building to the tallest building to the right, we can just start from the right of the array and keep track of the current max height. So if we walk through the problem again, starting at building 3, we need to check if it is the tallest building we have seen so far. But since we haven't seen any buildings, the current max height would just be 0, which is the height of the ocean. Since building 3 has a height of 1, it is taller than the current max height, so we would mark it as a building with an ocean view and also change the current max height to 1. Now, if we move on to building 2, which has a height of 3, this height is greater than the current max height, so we would also set building 2 as a building with an ocean view, as well as change the max height to 3. And now when we move on to building 1, we can see that it has a height of 2, which is not greater than the current max height, which is 3. So we wouldn't do anything since it's not a building with an ocean view. And then finally moving on to building 0, which has a height of 4, we can see that it is greater than the current max height of 3. So we would mark it as a building with an ocean view and also set the current max height to 4. And then we would just return all the buildings that have an ocean view. Okay, so let's start coding the solution to the problem. Like I mentioned before, we need to keep track of the current max height. So I will create a variable called current max height and set it to 0 for the height of the ocean. Now we also want to keep track of all the buildings that have an ocean view. So I will be creating an array called result. And with everything set up, we can start iterating through the array starting from the right. And if the height of the current building is greater than the current max height, then we want to append the building to result. And at the end of each iteration, we want to update the current max height to whatever is greater, the height of the current building or the current max height that's already being stored. And now we just return result. But we have to remember that we wanted to return the buildings in increasing order. And the way we approached the problem, we started from the right and went to the left. So we actually stored the buildings in reverse order. So to have a proper return value, we would just return result reversed. And if we run this code, we can see that works perfectly, and it has a runtime complexity of O of 2n, which is just O of n, and a space complexity of O of n, since we store the buildings in an array.